Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're undertaking a deeply important journey. We're going to be looking through the lens of some rich, classic historical imagery and maps to really understand a defining epoch of the 20th century. We are going to trace the darkest descent in human history, World War II and the Holocaust. But we aren't just going to stop in the darkness. We're also going to examine how a completely new global legal order emerged directly from those ashes. So this is a story of unprecedented destruction, absolutely. But it's also a story of how humanity attempted to build safeguards so that this kind of devastation could literally never happen again.
Okay, let's dive into this. 70 to 85 million. It is just a staggering figure. World War II stands as the deadliest armed conflict in recorded human history, and honestly, it's by an enormous margin. To put that into perspective, scholars estimate that this death toll represented about 3% of the entire global population in 1940. That was roughly 2.3 billion people at the time. So, to truly understand the modern world we live in, we first have to grapple with the sheer, unimaginable scale of this loss.
And when you break those numbers down by nation, well, the immense scale of the losses becomes even more apparent. The Soviet Union endured the greatest losses of any nation, with roughly 27 million dead. 27 million! This reflects catastrophic military operations, things like Operation Barbarossa and the Battle of Stalingrad, which remain among the bloodiest chapters of the entire war. China suffered heavily as well, with somewhere between 15 and 20 million casualties, while Germany lost approximately 7 to 8 million people. And that rest of the world slice, that encompasses dozens of nations, all of them forever altered by this conflict.
So how exactly was such a catastrophic death toll achieved? Well, it was due to a strategy known as total war, and this is an absolutely crucial term for our historical understanding today. Total war is a military strategy that deliberately targets civilian infrastructure right alongside military forces, on every single front. Basically, the traditional lines between combatant and non-combatant, they were completely erased. The factory worker, the farmer, the everyday city resident, they all became targets in this massive effort to break an enemy nation's capacity to fight.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark, undeniable reality it presents. Civilians actually accounted for the vast majority of all World War II fatalities worldwide. Think about that for a second. This wasn't just soldiers dying on battlefields. The majority of those 70 to 85 million victims died from the Holocaust, from strategic fire bombings, from widespread famine, and from these brutal systems of forced labor that were imposed across occupied territories all over the globe.
Let's look at what this actually looked like on the ground across different global fronts, because the grim reality of total war really spared no one. In Leningrad, German forces utilized siege warfare for 872 days. That caused roughly 1 million civilians to die just from starvation. Over in Japan, American bombers firebombed Tokyo on a single night in March 1945, killing an estimated 100,000 people in just hours. And in Britain, the city of London endured the Blitz, suffering 43,000 civilian deaths from these sustained, relentless bombing campaigns.
Which brings us to another key term defining this era: aerial bombardment. This was the continuous attack by bombs dropped from military aircraft. It was a tactic used extensively to basically incinerate industrial and historic cities. British and American air forces launched these massive, sustained strategic bombing campaigns against German industrial centers. And this fundamentally changed the nature of warfare, because it brought the destruction directly to the enemy's homeland, right from the skies above. And this strategy escalated into some truly terrifying extremes. In February 1945, the historic center of Dresden, Germany, was incinerated within hours by Allied firebombing. Over in occupied China, Japan's Imperial Army conducted horrific biological warfare experiments on civilians and prisoners through something called Unit 731. And ultimately, as we know, in August 1945, atomic bombs destroyed the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, causing tens of thousands of immediate deaths. The debates over the deployment of those atomic weapons, they continue to shape international nuclear policy today.
But while the military conflict raged globally, there was a whole other war, an ideological war of extermination being waged in Europe. To understand the Holocaust, we really must define its root: anti-Semitism. When combined with the specific, radical racial ideology of the Nazi Party, this hostility and prejudice formed the basis of a belief in Aryan supremacy over literally all other peoples. This worldview didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was explicitly outlined in Adolf Hitler's 1925 manifesto, Mein Kampf, which blamed Jewish people for Germany's social and economic problems following World War I.
Let's move to and see how this builds, right? from rhetoric to systematic murder, because the escalation was absolutely terrifying. In 1935, you have the Nuremberg Laws, which stripped Jewish citizens of their basic rights. By 1938, the Kristallnacht pogrom saw thousands of synagogues and businesses destroyed overnight. Fast forward to 1941, mobile killing units called Einsatzgruppen began mass shootings in occupied Soviet territory. And then, in January 1942, the Wannsee Conference was convened to formally coordinate what they called the final solution.
That Wannsee Conference really ushered in an era of systematic extermination. And it's important to understand, this wasn't chaotic, random violence. It was the highly bureaucratic, highly organized logistics of mass murder. Senior Nazi officials like Reinhard Heydrich and Adolf Eichmann chaired this conference, coordinating the logistics with this chilling bureaucratic precision. Meanwhile, Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda, was busy using film, radio, and newspapers to systematically dehumanize Jewish communities in the public eye. He was laying the psychological groundwork for these atrocities to be accepted.
The human toll of this systematic extermination is frankly devastating. Approximately 6 million Jewish people were murdered. That represents an unimaginable 2/3 of all European Jewry. 2/3! But the Nazi racial ideology targeted others as well. More than 3 million Soviet prisoners of war perished in captivity, alongside hundreds of thousands of Roma people, disabled individuals, and other targeted communities all across occupied Europe.
Actually executing the final solution required a massive, grim infrastructure. 6 dedicated death camps were constructed in occupied Poland. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was the largest of these, approximately 1.1 million people were murdered. But amidst all this horror, there was also profound resistance. In the spring of 1943, Jewish residents of the Warsaw Ghetto staged an extraordinary armed uprising against overwhelming odds. The full, horrific scale of these camps was finally revealed to the wider world in early 1945, when advancing Allied forces liberated places like Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, and Buchenwald. As the war finally ended, the globe faced some starkly contrasting post-war realities. On one hand, you had unprecedented reconstruction. Take the 1948 Marshall Plan, which directed $13 billion to rebuild war-devastated Western European economies. Yet simultaneously, we have to acknowledge internal civil liberties violations happening at home. In the United States, Executive Order 9066 had authorized the internment of approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans during the conflict. And it wasn't until the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 that the U.S. formally apologized and offered redress for this widely condemned policy.
So in the immediate aftermath of the war, as the sheer massive scale of the Holocaust was laid bare, the world realized something important. Existing laws were totally insufficient. And this leads us to the rebirth phase of our narrative. In response to these atrocities, the Nuremberg trials of 1945 and 1946 established a vital new legal framework. They introduced crimes against humanity as a recognized category of international law for the very first time. Now, the architects of state-sponsored atrocities could actually be held globally accountable.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the specific horrors of the Holocaust directly forged new international human rights laws. We literally gained a new word, genocide. Defined as the intentional destruction of a people, this term was championed by scholar Raphael Lemkin. His tireless advocacy directly shaped the United Nations Genocide Convention in 1948, which formalized the world's legal stance against the attempted annihilation of entire groups of people. This era sparked a rapid, massive institutional transformation designed to protect humanity in the future. Step 1 was the United Nations Charter in 1945, creating a framework for collective international security. Step 2 was that UN Genocide Convention in 1948 we just talked about. And Step 3 came in 1949, when the Geneva Conventions were updated and strengthened. They explicitly expanded non-combatant immunity, ensuring much greater protections for civilians and prisoners of war going forward.
But it wasn't just legal frameworks. The trauma of the war fundamentally redrew the political map of the modern world. The Cold War began almost immediately, leading to the formal partition of Germany into East and West. Furthermore, the devastating impact of the Holocaust and the massive plight of displaced persons accelerated international support, directly contributing to the founding of the State of Israel in 1948.
From all this dark history emerged a rallying cry, a foundational moral principle embedded deeply in international human rights frameworks: never again. The Holocaust is recognized as the defining moral atrocity of the 20th century, And this simple two-word phrase became the anchor for global education. It's a mandate that humanity must remain incredibly vigilant against the early signs of prejudice, dehumanization, and state-sponsored violence.
So the crucial point is that active commemoration is how we uphold that promise and fight genocide denial today. Institutions like Yad Vashem in Jerusalem preserve vital victim testimonies, while the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum educates millions every single year. Literature plays a massive role too. Elie Wiesel's 1960 memoir Night remains an absolutely essential piece of moral witness, passing the memory of survival and tragedy to subsequent generations so the truth is never, ever forgotten.
We leave you today with a critical question. World War II's immense human toll permanently reshaped global norms across every single continent. The legal and moral frameworks forged in the ashes of the 1940s, from debates over nuclear policy to the enforcement of international humanitarian law, well, they govern the world we live in right now. So as you look at the news today, ask yourself, how are the lessons of this era still being debated? And how do they continue to shape our global legal order? Thank you so much for exploring this history with us. Keep questioning and keep learning.